Khaldoun. So Khaldoun, I'll just read his bio. Khaldoun Aziz Swiss, PhD, is former chair and currently associate professor of philosophy at Olive Harvey College in Chicago, and he serves as a tutor in philosophy with Oxford University in England. He was born in Amman, Jordan. His experience entails teaching philosophy for over a decade, as well as speaking at conferences both nationally and abroad, such as Hong Kong, Romania, Australia, and England. He has 3 books, including Debating Christian Theism, and the newest being Killing God, How to Respond to the 7 Most Common Objections of New Atheism. You can get that on Amazon, and I suspect, Khaldoun, that some of the content that we'll hear tonight comes from that book. So I definitely would recommend you all to check that out. He's a member of the American Philosophical Association. Khaldoun lives in Chicago. Khaldoun, what else can I say about you?
That I love the Lord, and I'm ready to get moving forward with this and engaging people who disagree with respect and with logic.
Awesome. Yeah, Khaldoun loves the Lord. He's a great guy. I think everyone probably on this in this meeting are everyone is believers, but everybody's at a different point in their faith walk. And so, I think you'll find what Khaldoun has to say of value and interesting to you. If you're a believer, it'll strengthen your belief. If you are concerned about defending your faith, then it might help in terms of, what do I say to the atheist that says such and such, if you happen to be a non-believer or not sure where you are. I hope these comments will help you in moving you toward belief. So Khaldoun, I'm going to turn the virtual floor over to you, buddy. And I'm going to give you a share screen, and we'll see how that goes.
Got it. Well, thank you all for having me. It's a pleasure to be here with you. I am excited about this because this is a major topic that we need to address, not only in a theological level, but also a psychological one as well. It came to head for me when I was a sophomore at Eastern Illinois University. And when I was there, what ended up happening is I took a class on myth and culture. And in that class, I had a fascinating situation where the professor there, hold on a minute, I'm getting an echo here for some reason. There you go. Hopefully that works. Okay. So I took a class on myth and culture. And while I was in that class, the professor, who was a very interesting character, he came to class without shoes. They called him the caveman, and you can smell him coming, by the way. He was a very interesting, he was a brilliant guy, though. And he definitely had the calluses on his feet. He had some huge feet. I remember those feet, man. So anyway, he started the class by saying, anyone who believes in the ancient doctrine of a deity who controls everything we do, of some kind of God and a pie in the sky kind of ideology, in this class, I will be proving to you that that is nothing more than mythology on par with Thor, Hercules, and of course, other mythological characters. It will be gone by the time you're finished with my class, this ridiculous ideology that we believe in called God. I was just in shock because I was a semi-new believer at the time. I heard nothing else he said. I waited till he finished the first day. I left, quickly went to the dean's office and dropped the class. Till this day, I regret that decision. I fled like a zebra from a lion. I was terrified. Not only was I afraid of my faith being lost, but I didn't know how to respond, even if he did challenge me. And of course, that was an experience that humbled me. Now I run to the lions, not away from them, because of that experience. And God ended up surrounding me that semester with 5 or 6 of my friends who ended up playing role-playing games, all of them atheist skeptics. What is Right. No, and they just come hammering me with questions on epistemology, ethics, ontology, and other things I had no idea how to respond to. And I would dig into the deep literature in Christian history and found there's a plethora of information out there. Augustine, Aquinas, Luther, Plantinga, wow. And I just was able to respond to them and go back and dig deeper and keep, and the Lord just strategically set me up. In my failure, he built me up. In my destruction, he put me into construction. God has an amazing way of working. And this brings me for the topic for today, atheism. And if you'll recommend, if you'd like to take a look at this in more detail, this is available. It's called Killing God. It fits in your hand. Not too threatening there. The lecture is on the available there on Amazon, like Mike said to you. And let's see if we can all see this. All right. Give me a thumbs up if you can see that. Hopefully you know how to do that, or just shout it out. See my screen? Yes?
You're good, Khaldoun.
We're good. All right, great. Living Without God, the New Atheists and their best arguments against God. The New Atheists are a fascinating bunch. There's a few of them out there, and they're continuing to grow. So there's a book there. That's just an older cover of it, Killing God. When we want to talk about atheism, we want to ask the question, what is an atheist? By definition, an atheist is the word theia, which is a negation in Greek, like asymmetrical or amoral. Theos, theist, is the word for God in Greek. It's also in Latin and different other aspects of that, like a deos. But the word theos is one who believes in God, and then atheist is one who denies God. And that is what the technical definition of the word is. To deny, it's the absolute denial of the absolute. That is technically what atheism has been referred to since its beginning. However, such definitions have fallen on hard times. Modern, more sophisticated atheists will tell you, no, we don't deny that God exists. We just have lack of belief in God. We lack belief in God is the standard definition. There are different types of atheists, of course. But to say I lack belief in God means problematic, to say the least. First, it denies the standard definition based on the encyclopedia philosophy. Bertrand Russell and other great atheists would deny that definition and say, no, we deny that there is a God. And there are different levels of atheists. For example, Richard Dawkins, the most famous one, which I'll talk about in a bit, says he's on a scale of 1 to 10, he's around a 7 or an 8 of almost certainty that there isn't one. So what does the word atheism mean? It means the denial of the absolute, or the absolute denial of the absolute. But there are different atheists who accept different forms of that definition. Take, for example, Sigmund Freud, one of the most famous atheists in history. Sigmund Freud was a fascinating character, father of psychoanalysis and modern day psychology. He's got a lot of bad rap regarding his views on sexuality and things of that nature. But Sigmund Freud had denied the existence of a God and called it a wish fulfillment argument. You deeply desire for there to be a God, for say a father in the sky. Therefore, you manifest this delusional belief. And if you're articulate enough, like Moses was, he wrote a book called Moses and Monotheism, which argued that Moses was a very brilliant rhetorical magician who fooled the Egyptian people using magic and trickery into believing in the Judeo God that they believe in, that we hold to today. Fascinating, Freud's father was a deeply religious Orthodox Jew who told him in his the Bible that he gave him, "My son, may you follow the words of this book and may they bring you life." Freud denied his father, which I'll talk about a little bit later, and his father's God. Friedrich Nietzsche also had a problem with his daddy. His daddy had daddy issues. By the way, Karl Marx did as well. We'll talk about that later as well. Friedrich Nietzsche also had Presbyterian father ministers and others in his family. He also denied God and came up with the concept called the death of God movement in the 19th century. He argued that God does not exist. It's an ideological stereotype or archetype. But when we eliminate this archetype, we also eliminate all standards for morality and decency in the world. And Friedrich Nietzsche was right. The 20th century, 21st century was some of the most bloodiest century in the history of the world. Karl Marx as well. Actually, his system was worse than Hitler's, which is a form of intense or extreme socialism or communism, as it was known in his day, where he tries to equalize everything and get rid of the opioid of the people, or the drug of the people, which is God. So Sigmund Freud, Friedrich Nietzsche, and Marx are some of the three great atheists that we know of. There are multiple others in history. These are the fathers of the new atheist movement. The one you see on the left there is Richard Dawkins. He has the most best-selling book on atheism in the world, called The God Delusion. The other is Christopher Hitchens. Christopher Hitchens passed on maybe 3-4 years ago. Christopher Hitchens argued and did actually debates with Bill Craig and a few other Christians. And he denied God all the way to his deathbed. His brother actually wrote a book affirming his belief in the Christian God. Ironically, he got a lot of press for that. Sigmund, you have here Sam Harris, who's still making his rounds, and Daniel Dennett. Daniel Dennett is in my realm, which is in philosophy. And Sam Harris is in the neuroscience field. All four deny the existence of God for different reasons, primarily on moral fabric reasons. There are different levels of atheists. What you end up finding is the atheist who's indifferent, who says basically, I don't deny that there's a God, and I don't affirm that there is evidence against God. I just don't care. You ever met anybody like that? You have an indifferent person? There's actually a term for them in the sociological research. They're called the nuns. I'll get into some of the research on them. They're the basic position that says they are indifferent to the very position of God. So you need to quantify and ask people why they believe what they believe, and why is it that this issue is not even important to them. Sadly, many believers today have what's called a moralistic, therapeutic, deistic view of God. That's a technical way of saying that although I believe in God, cognitively speaking, my life says otherwise. Fascinating aspect of atheism is an intense anger or animosity toward God. Now, not all atheists fall into this camp, but one of my favorite authors, C.S. Lewis, did fall into that camp as he was in his later teen years into his early adulthood years. He was actually angry at God for not existing, angry at God for taking his mother's life from him. And that is ironic, because how could you be so angry at something that does not exist? It's called cognitive dissonance, by the way. It's what you know to be true is different than what you want to be true. And here's the data here on percentage of people who claim to be atheists. The vast majority of them are in the East or in Asia. That's China there, as you see that. The problem with the data and specific documented research on statistics in this regard is the vast majority of people in China actually is the Christian church. That's actually growing there, but they're not saying it publicly. So if you ask people on a census, what are they? Oh, of course I'm atheist. It's like asking people in the Muslim world, are you Muslim? How dare you say otherwise? So it's hard to see the data in repressive countries like China or in Iran and other parts where they ask people what their faith is. So be careful of some of the numbers here. So the darker the number is, the more atheists or the more skeptics that you see around the world. The United States is growing. Europe is even more. As you can see, it's a darker spot here in blue in Europe. Interesting, when you ask the question, oh, I don't know if you can see my screen now. That disappeared on you for a bit. Hopefully it'll come back there in a bit. Okay, there it is. So religious groups performed well in knowledge. Take a look at that. This is fascinating. What you end up seeing here is how when tests are conducted and asking people how much knowledge they have of God and the scriptures or other world religions, what you end up finding is something fascinating. The people who know the most about this are the ones who deny it the most as well. That's the irony. I'm not sure. Can you all see my screen? I think I just went out. I had a blackout for a moment.
Yeah, I can see it.
Okay, great. As you see here, percentage who scored the correct numbers here. Look at the bottom here for atheist agnostic. You see that? It's at 20%. That's their score, scored correct out of 32 questions. Atheists actually know more about religion than the average Pentecostal, evangelical, Protestant, Mormon, or Catholic. On average, this is general sociological research done by asking people general questions about who Abraham was, what is Bethlehem, what does the Easter signify, etc. So when you're dealing with atheists, you're not generally speaking, especially outspoken ones, usually their view has been honed by a lot of, if they want to call it persecution or animosity or a pushback from their religious families. Ironically, I was in Europe a little while ago. Yes, it's still possible for you to travel. You just got to get tested when you arrive and tested when you leave and tested when you land. When I was there, I met a young lady on the plane who told me she left her family in Utah. And she said, I asked her, why did you leave? Why are you traveling? She said, because they actually support Trump. Can you believe it? I said, oh, wow, they support Trump. Yeah, there's a few people who do. But anyway, she left one of those reasons. And they said, that's the only thing? She said, no. They actually believe in the Bible too. Really? Oh, wow. Well, you have to meet some of those dinosaurs somewhere. We had an interesting conversation, but she knew a lot about it, but she was very skeptical, very atheistic, because she said that her family had such an oppressive view of it that they shoved it down her throat and her brother's sister's throat. Sadly, that pushes people away from faith. So interesting here, you see Paul Vitz is a psychologist, and he did some fascinating research on atheism. And I want to touch on some of his work. He's a fascinating guy who analyzed the problems of atheism from a psychological perspective. And Paul Vitz is a professor emeritus of psychology at New York University, senior scholar at the Institute for Psychological Studies in Arlington, Virginia. He actually argues the theory that atheism and fatherlessness are linked together. He shows that childhoods of prominent atheists were marked by absent or defective fathers. Freud's father, for example, was apparently weak, sexually deviant. Friedrich Nietzsche's father, although he loved him, he was a clergyman, but his beloved father, never in good health, died when Friedrich Nietzsche was young, when he was 5 years old. Nietzsche saw his God, the God of his father, as weak. That was one of his influences as he grew up. Marx vigorously rejected his father's faith and his superficial conversion to Christianity. Joseph Stalin was repeatedly beaten and humiliated by his Christian father. Mao Zedong was hated by his aristocratic father. Basically, Vitz was saying that evidence seems to support the thesis that the vast majority of famous atheists like Voltaire, Schopenhauer, H.G. Wells, Albert Camus, John Paul Sartre, Bertrand Russell, and others have terrible and significant issues with their fathers. And he says that contributes to a denial of and an animosity of the great father that you have in heaven. Sigmund Freud himself wrote, psychoanalysis, which has taught us that the intimate connection between the father complex and belief in God has shown us that the person God is logically nothing but an exalted father, and daily demonstrates to us how youthful persons lose their religious belief as soon as the authority of the father breaks down. He says there's a link between strong atheism and lack of fatherly love or fatherly connection or absent fathers. Now let me clarify something about that. But when you get into the issue of faith and reason on this issue, you need to take a look at the argument wisely. Merely because I have an issue with my father, it doesn't prove that my father's God is false. Neither does it prove that my father's God is real. It actually doesn't prove anything, ontologically speaking. It just tells you an interesting psychological fact. Let me just be very clear about that. We need to use our reasoning here. Merely because the vast majority of atheists have problems with their father, it doesn't follow that atheism is false anymore than very religious believers, whether they're Catholic priests or Protestant ministers, abuse their families or their children, proves that there is no God. It doesn't at all. It just says that there's an interesting connection between the two. And the concept of faith and reason, what I'd like to do here, and as I'm going through this, is talk about some of the major arguments atheists have against God and some of the ones that have been presented in the last number of decades, as well as some of the major best-selling books out there. One of them is that religion is the opposite of reason. Religion is the opposite of reason. And in many cases, this is the case. In other cases, it's not. But it is a caricature. And the vast majority of people I have met who denied belief in God or denied the reality of Jesus of Nazareth alive today and working in people actually have a caricature view of him. When you ask them who this God is, it's not the same God I believe in. I just have to ask. Sometimes asking people questions, you get to dig deep. You say, yeah, it's interesting that you talk about God as a malevolent, wicked being the way you are, talking about him, abusive, malevolent being. I don't believe in that God either. Let's talk about the God I do believe in. Maybe we can have some discussion there. So use reason and faith are not necessarily opposites of them, opposites of each other. As a matter of fact, when you take a look at the actual book of Hebrews, it says the following. Actually, let me pause here for a moment. May I have a volunteer to read that wonderful verse?
I'll read it.
Now, faith is a substance.
Go ahead.
Oh, okay.
Go ahead, Debbie.
Oh, okay. Sorry. Now, faith is the substance of things hoped for, the evidence of things not seen. From Hebrews 11:1.
Thanks for reading that. As you can see, this is in the word for faith in Greek is pistos, which actually means trust. Trusting in that which you do not see because of evidence from the things you do. It's like trusting your spouse or your father because of a history of integrity, a history of truth saying. So when they do say things that don't make sense, you trust them based on their integrity and their character. It's like a young child wanting to jump out of a window and can't see her father in the smoke and the flames about to engulf the building. And her father says from 2 stories down, jump, I can see you, jump. And faith is jumping not into the dark, it's jumping into the light. Mike heads an organization in Chicago called Reasonable Faith. And that is the opposite of blind faith. The biblical faith is a reasonable faith. At least we claim it is. We have our issues, I know. But it's a biblical faith. It's a type of faith that believes based on evidence, not in spite of it. So I need to point that out. That's pretty important there. Now, Dawkins, I want to show you something that he said that's fascinating to me. In his book, The God Delusion, it's full of a lot of rhetoric. And I want you to hear him directly as he speaks about this. I think it's incredibly important to see what he means when he says and how he says what he says. I'd like to give him the floor for a moment. So here's Mr. Dawkins.
The God of the Old Testament is arguably the most unpleasant character in all fiction. Jealous and proud of it, a petty, unjust, unforgiving control freak, a vindictive, bloodthirsty ethnic cleanser, a misogynistic, homophobic, racist, infanticidal, genocidal, filicidal, pestilential, megalomaniacal, sadomasochistic, capriciously malevolent bully.
Okay, thank you, Dawkins. All right, that was a brilliant argument that disproved the very existence of God now, isn't it? No, that's nothing more than saying you're ugly and your mother dresses you funny. Therefore, what you just said is false. It's not an argument, guys. This is just a rhetoric of somebody going off on an issue without giving you logical, rational reasons for it. Matter of fact, many atheists have called Richard Dawkins to task in his book for his lack of logical arguments against the very concept of the deity. What you hear here is a lot of anger and animosity over the very the position that God has instituted. Specifically, he's talking about judgment in the Old Testament, and Dawkins has a major problem with that. The problem is that Dawkins himself denies the very concept of moral values at an objective, universal level. So, but he's using objective, universal morals to judge God with. And the irony of it cannot escape you. It is illogical. It's like saying, I cannot speak English. Believe me, I can't. Well, in order for me to say that, I would have to speak English, don't I? And that is there's a lot more to the God delusion, of course, than that. I recommend, if your faith is strong, to read it. If it's not, wait till you establish it before you get into things like this, because he does call into question the moral veracity of the faith. By the way, Richard Dawkins is not a philosopher by training or an ethicist. He is a biologist and a specialist in evolutionary biology, actually, to be special. And one of the major reasons and arguments against God is that religion causes too many wars. Religion causes too much bloodshed in the world. And that is an issue that has to be addressed. And as many of my colleagues and apologists have pointed out, Marxism and Leninism in the Soviet Union, as well as in China, have killed more people than all the religious wars combined. It was atheists who actually executed more people than all the religious wars and religious people you could put together with. Look at the data, do the research. It's true. Are religions responsible for many wars? Yes. Why? Because people are responsible for many wars, and people are religious. People are also ideological. You can take the worst position and put good people in it, and they can start redeeming the ideology or the government. Take the best government, or take the best garden, so to speak, the best Eden, and put the worst people in there, and they can twist it. It can happen with Christianity. It can happen with Islam. It can happen with Marxism. It's the people inside it that can grow it or crush it, the ideology that is. So Jesus told us that you are a city on a hill. Shine your light before men. The irony is, if your light is dim, your darkness begins to come out of you like a pestilence to the people around you. And if you know anybody who's religious and spiritual, but does not love God, and their life is full of abuse and hatred and animosity, that's actually worse. That's why it stands out so much. But we cannot ignore the ugliness that religion has brought, and Christianity sometimes, in the name of Christ, has done some terrible things. That's not something we can ignore. It's true. But it's done it in spite of the teachings of Jesus, not because of them. So we need to ask some more deeper questions as we go through this. Are there any good arguments against the existence of God? There are popular ones. I think I don't know if you want to classify them as good per se. There are interesting arguments that are common, and I want to address some of these with you. Heard this one before? Well, tell me, who made God? As if it's something new that somebody came up with. How do you address this? Well, one of the things you learn if you take any philosophy courses or you think on a deeper level, you always question the question. Who made God is an actual paradoxical question itself. The very question itself is questionable. Let me break it down. So the very term God, philosophically, theologically speaking, means one who was uncreated, an eternal being, okay? So if God is the uncreated being, so asking who created the uncreated being is paradoxical. It's like saying, how tall is a married bachelor? Can't answer the question. Why aren't you answering the question? Why are you trying to hide? I'm not hiding. The question itself is a pseudo question. I cannot begin to answer it. God is by definition the greatest conceivable being, perfection itself. Perfection means one who never had a beginning and will never have an end. I am the Alpha and the Omega, God says to us. The one who died and came back. By the way, Jesus said that, which is an indication of his deity. If God is the being who has no beginning, so asking who began God is a paradox. It's another way of saying, can you beat an unbeatable game? Or can God make so many pancakes that he can't eat them? What? Can God do something he can't do? That goes into the paradox of the rock question as well. God is a being who could do anything that's logically possible to do. So can God do something that's not logically possible? No. But then it gets into a paradox. You're telling me I'm limiting the very being of God with asking these questions. So I think, well, instead of trying to answer the question of who made God, I think we should try to get into the presuppositions of why people even ask the question and what it means to have a beginning and what the very term God even means. God is, by theistic standards, the being whom always existed and will always exist. So one of the ways I address this with my skeptic friends is to tell them, if there is a God, hear me clearly, if there is, then this God, by definition, would be perfect or would be eternal. Therefore, it's not fair for you to ask me a question that no one in their right mind can possibly give you a coherent answer to in that way. Who made God is a paradoxical question. It's a pseudo question. Can God create a rock so heavy he can't lift it? That goes back to the pancakes. Can God make so many pancakes he can't eat? Remember, the scriptures say that there is nothing beyond the ability of God. There's nothing he cannot do. When you break this down, that doesn't seem to indicate a complete absolute standard here, because God cannot lie. God cannot sin. God cannot commit suicide. God cannot do evil or make a mistake in mathematics. Why? Not because of a limit in his character, but because of his character, because of his wonders, because of his glory, he's not able to make these mistakes. It's like somebody who's completely, utterly faithful to her husband, loves him with all her heart, and then she's presented with a chance to cheat and to go into an illicit affair. Psychologically speaking, she is unable to do it. It's not like she doesn't want to do it. She doesn't. She's not even able to want to do it because it's not, does that make her a weak spouse? Actually, no. The fact that she can't cheat makes her stronger. I think it's the same thing with God. There are things God can't do, not because he's weak, but because he's strong. And one of those is sin, which is the very definition of missing the mark or going away from God or loving something less than the very absolutes of the nature of God. Can God create a rock that he can't lift is a paradoxical question. It's another of many others out there. There's another one, an issue in cosmology that's brought up a lot. And let me get the floor here for somebody who has passed on, actually, who now knows the truth, if such a thing exists, which I think he does. Richard, we're going to give the floor now to Mr. Stephen Hawking. Let's see. And here it is. Here is Stephen. During his day, he was on the Larry King Live, and here's what Larry King asked Stephen Hawking.
Good evening. Very special program tonight. Stephen Hawking is a theoretical physicist. He was the Lucasian professor of mathematics at the University of Cambridge for 30 years. He's the 2009 recipient of the Presidential Medal of Freedom and co-author of a brilliant and controversial new book, The Grand Design. And we welcome him back to Larry King Live. We have a series of questions planned. Let's get right to it. Stephen, why is it important to find the grand design of our universe?
I believe everyone should have a broad picture of how the universe operates and our place in it. It is a basic human desire, and it also puts our other worries in perspective.
You say that science can explain the universe without the need for a creator. What is that explanation? Why is there something instead of nothing?
Gravity and quantum theory cause universes to be created spontaneously out of nothing.
You write that because there is a law such as gravity, the universe can and will create itself from nothing. Will you tell me how that law came into existence?
Gravity is a consequence of M theory, which is the only possible unified theory. It is like saying, why is 2 plus 2 4?
Well, I guess simply put, do you believe in God?
God may exist, but science can explain the universe without the need for a creator.
So he may exist. I'll pick up on that with the panel. Your book has stirred a lot of controversy. Why do you think people react so strongly to your contention that it's not necessary to invoke God to explain the creation of the universe?
Science is increasingly answering questions that used to be the province of religion.
One of your colleagues at Cambridge says that science provides us with a narrative as to how existence may happen, but theology addresses the meaning of the narrative. How do you respond to that?
The scientific account is complete. Theology is unnecessary.
Okay, let me pause here for a moment, come back. Okay, as you can see here, Richard Dawkins is considered one of the most brilliant minds who ever lived. He was chair in Cambridge University, took Newton's chair actually over there. And his argument basically is that science itself can explain the universe without the hypothesis of God being necessary. What you have here is a position called naturalism or scientism. It's a viewpoint that says only the physical can be explained and can be the way to understand everything in life. If you'd like to dive into this issue in more detail, I have written an article on my webpage, Logically Faithful, called 10 Things That You Cannot Prove with Science Alone. And what's assumed here by Hawking and others is that scientism is an explanation for everything. It doesn't explain everything. Matter of fact, you need philosophy to explain science, not the other way around. Morality. You can't explain moral systems using scientific enterprise, but you can do it the other way around. So using science and the aspect of criminology and dealing with issues like blood, you can figure out who killed somebody, how they killed them, when they killed them. But to know that it's wrong to kill them is not a scientific question. Science only can go so far. And Richard Hawkins' position is that gravity explains everything. No, because you still need an explanation for the very explanation itself. This is where philosophy and theology come in. But we need to be careful there. I remember I was submitting a TED talk, and one of their problems is the issue of quantum theory and in the area of gravity theory, because it's such a new phenomena in the study in physics that everybody and their mother and their mystical viewpoints is jumping in to fill it in with their own gods and their own goddesses. So we need to be careful of the God in the gaps theory. We can't explain something, therefore it must be God, and trying to fit God into these unknown characteristics. That's not what we do in cosmology. And if you follow the work of Bill Craig, he's shown positive arguments for the existence of God, not just arguments from its negation. So we don't know, therefore, God. No, we do know based on design. Design includes the possibility of a designer. The universe has design, therefore the universe has a designer. That's a positive argument, not one from ignorance. There's a lot we could say there regarding that. We'll go back. Okay, so the universe came from nothing is a problem. And I like how R.C. Sproul said it, that God is the ultimate cause, not the effect. Everything else is the effect. Everything starts at the throne of God himself. Matter of fact, it is an absurd notion that the law of gravity is the one that actually created everything, because you still have the concept of nothing coming from existence from everything, or the other way around. It doesn't work. I actually have a book called The Theory of Nothingness, and it's about nothing. It's a concept that says nothing itself is philosophically impossible on that level unless you have something outside of it coming in. The Grand Design is Stephen Hawking's book. And of course, Lawrence Krauss, which Bill Craig debated, argues that the beginning of the universe was nothingness and everything came from it. But if you analyze what that nothingness is, it's not nothingness. It's quantum field, gravity, electrons and protons and laws that actually structure the very nature of reality are there. It's fascinating. It's not nothing. Something put that together. Whatever it was extremely powerful, extremely intelligent. And I like Professor John Lennox at Oxford University, professor of mathematics. He did some fascinating work in response to Stephen Hawking. I recommend his books on that. And he talks about, for example, saying that if I ate nothing for lunch, you would be insane to ask me how that nothing tastes. I ate nothing for lunch. How did it taste? So it doesn't taste anything. It's nothing. Right. Well, the universe is not like that. There is something there that things came from, and there's a being behind all that. And that's the problem of saying the universe came from nothing. They're playing games with words. The term nothing means nothing to the vast majority of viewers and listeners. But it doesn't mean nothing when you say nothing. They're equivocating, which is another logical fallacy. The subatomic quantum field is what they mean by nothing. And that is clearly something, not nothing. I, for example, admit that these men like Hawking and Krauss are brilliant, but Professor John Lennox points out that their knowledge of black holes and cosmology is wonderful and it helps add to the academy. But to say that the universe can and will create itself from nothing sounds to me like Alice in Wonderland. It's not science. If I say X creates X, I presuppose the existence of X in order to account for the existence of X. To presuppose the existence of the universe is to account for its existence is logically incoherent, or simply put, from nothing, nothing comes. Nothing cannot do anything. Let me rephrase it. If something created itself, it would have to exist before that, and that is absurd. So if the universe made itself, it would have to be there before it made itself, which is absurd. Then what was it doing in the first place? Who made it? It's like the Buddhistic concept that says you have to learn to deny the reality that you have a self. Who's the one denying the self? You are. So there is a self there that denies a self. This is called a paradox. It's an obvious answer to the question of truth. One of the ways you know something is false is when it contradicts itself. Or you just don't understand it. The meaning of life, that's me and my little ones. I was a little chef there for them. When you talk about the meaning of life, you need to ask yourself, are the people you love, everything around you, are they nothing more than amino acids, plus time, plus chance, plus matter? Are the things that you do forever gone into infinite nothingness? Or is there something lasting and significant about life itself, about love, about truth, about holiness? And when somebody deeply wrongs you and hurts you and takes away the life of your son or your child or your dignity, you think that person gets away with it? Not if God exists. No one gets away with anything. God makes sure justice comes down. Immanuel Kant, the great thinker and philosopher, argued one of the reasons he believed in God was because of love and because of justice. Things like your family and the depth of love you have for them. These ontological relationships do not cease to exist when you die. They continue into eternity, into a communion with God. Not a union like a pantheistic sense, but a communion. And God will bring justice to the evil and bring hope for those who suffered. That brings me hope. Why do I believe that? Not because I just want it to be true, but because I'm convinced it is true based on the evidence. Does God exist? I am convinced that God does exist. Not because I just want it to be the case, but because I see the evidence leaning toward that proposition. We need to look at that evidence and not dismiss it, ignore it, or minimize it. I have an example for you guys from a great book in literature. It's actually an article written by William Clifford in 1877. It's called The Ethics of Belief. He said, imagine there's a ship owner who's about to go on a sea, travel on his sea voyage. And hold on a minute, let me pause for a moment and get this going. Okay, there I am. All right. So imagine for a moment, there is a ship owner and he has this ocean liner and he fills it up with people and he sends them off on their way, and that's how he makes his money. And this is what they did back in Europe. People would get on the ocean liners and the big boats and they send them off to the Americas to start a new life. The problem is, as Clifford said, is that this man knew that this boat that he was sending people on was damaged, had structural problems with its integrity. But he had faith that Providence would help it along. But he wasn't sure, but he just had faith. This boat, when it got halfway across the Atlantic, sunk, and all hundreds of people died in that. The man got his insurance money. Clifford said that that man's life is one long sin against mankind. Believing something without evidence or in spite of the evidence is immoral. If you have evidence telling you one thing and your mind says, this is what I see, but I deny it, you're being immoral. And if you say, oh, I don't have time to check the evidence for what I believe, then Clifford says, then you have no time to believe. Now, granted, you can't check the evidence for everything. You would go cognitively crazy. But the main things in life you need to check, such as who to marry, what kind of car to buy, what house to get into, or what God to worship. These are essentially important aspects of life that we need to verify and check. As I go through, and the scriptures tell us, taste and see that the Lord is good. God says to us that we get not because we ask not, because we ask for impure motives. God says, test me in this, see if I am the God that you believe in. Actually, he takes about that specifically with the issues of tithes and offerings, which goes into a different discussion, isn't it? And I don't want to get into the health and wealth gospel, which is problematic. But the point is that if we do believe something, there should be some evidence to back it up. And I think with the advent of theology backed up by apologetics, gives us more than enough evidence to believe. I now go to the lions instead of run away from them, because I believe fundamentally that Jesus of Nazareth is actually the God he claimed to be. He walked this earth and he has impacted the life of this man on earth more than anyone else in the history of humanity. The Church of Jesus Christ has done more good than all the nations, all the ideologies, all the governments in the world. World Vision, Compassion International, and every major church in every major metropolitan city has done more good than all the others. I think that's evidence that there's something good there. It starts with our own lives and the transformed heart within us. There's so much more to say, but I'll wrap it up with that and open up for some discussion. Thank you.
Thank you, Khaldoun. Thank you. Ours is an evidential faith, and I know there's lots of material that you covered, and we'll just open this up to questions. Some of you are muted, some of you aren't, but just feel free just to ask Khaldoun a question. If we start having a problem, we can use the chat box, but just speak up.
Hey, Khaldoun, this is Dave Ostro. Yeah, just a thought, or I'd like to get your thoughts on when Stephen Hawking says that we're supposed to follow the science, basically, and that will give us an answer. What specifically science is he talking about? So I'm thinking about the COVID-19 situation right now. All you hear about is follow the science, follow the science. But the truth of the matter is we haven't done real well on controlling this thing, and I don't think we really know how to. So we have scientists that say they know how to control this virus. It hasn't been done. So when these guys get out and say that, well, if you follow the science, what science specifically always is the right science? What data suggests the right conclusions can be drawn?
David, thank you for the question. It's a good one. Always question the presuppositions and thoughts and the patterns that people present to us. When people tell us follow the science, the problem is I teach classes on logic, and I used to actually believe that if you show people enough evidence, they'll see the light and convert or believe what you want. Oh boy, what a delusion. People don't change when they see the light, generally speaking. Some do, but they change when they feel the heat. And sometimes that heat moves them into a direction that's against the actual position that you're trying to hold. Such as in Islam. People are told that here's the evidence for Christ, that he is the Messiah, here's historical evidence that he died. The heat against them from their family and their community to believe that is so strong, they'll deny the evidence. Even though it's right there in history, in Jewish history, Christian history, and secular history, they'll deny it. So that's just an example from theology. Now in sciences, science itself is not an independent field of philosophy or ethics. So if I were to do some scientific research on COVID-19 with some colleagues in the lab, and they say, we only believe in science, follow the science, say, okay, there's a few of them doing that. And one of them actually comes up with a vaccine that actually works on the different strains of it. And before the team actually releases it, they turn the TV on and they notice one of their colleagues is already on CNN, Fox, NBC, and ABC, and BBC. He's already announced that he's released it and he's about to get the Nobel Prize. They said, wait a minute, we worked on this. Why is he getting all that credit? Did he do something wrong? He stole the data. But that's not scientifically provable that it's wrong. Ethics is a realm outside of science.
Right.
What Dawkins is saying there is follow the science is only looking at the data. 14.5 billion years ago, the universe started. Okay. Therefore, the universe started from nothing known. Now he jumps into philosophy. I can easily jump into theology, or some people jump into mysticism. He's not justifying the claim. Science only gives you the data, the facts. People have to interpret those facts.
That's right.
And you'll see that with criminal investigations, Dave. One detective will say this is a murder. Another will come and say, no, it's actually a suicide. But it's the same data. Depends on who's looking at it and the evidence based on who has the most reasonable hypothesis. And I think the hypothesis for theism is stronger.
Right, and your perspective.
Yeah, you know, Dave, I would add to that there are other avenues of knowledge other than science, and of course, I know you and Khaldoun would both agree with that. I'm teaching my middle school group in church about self-refuting statements, and Khaldoun mentioned one at the beginning of his talk. I can't speak a word of English. You know, the statement refutes itself. And the statement, science is the source of all truth, is also a self-refuting statement. And the question you ask is, what scientific experiment do you run to prove that science is the only way to all truth? And of course, you can't. So science is one way. And I think probably where you were going, Dave, is you can follow the science, but there's got to be other fields like ethics that are baked into decisions, particularly around things, you know, specific to this pandemic.
Right. Yeah, the COVID-19 issue is huge. Look how they deal with it in Switzerland and in Turkey. It's different than how we deal with it here in the UK. And they all have the same data, but they're dealing with it differently. Some are shutting down all their society for a disease that affects 97% of the people are healed from it. Others are saying that 3% are significant enough to shut down everyone about it. So how do you deal with it is a sociological, government, and ethical question, not a scientific one.
Right.
Well, you know, one of the things, since you're talking about the COVID-19 as an example, is that you end up with a lot of different people looking at the data, interpreting it differently. And then whose opinion are you going to take as the science? That's what I always challenge. You know, it's like, I guess when you come to faith is an individual decision. I don't care if anyone else in the world believes if I do, because no one's going to convince me differently. but it's like science. They try to make it sound like it's something that's pure, that it's unshakable as far as its being. It almost, in the sense, is what we believe is God, and yet it's not. It's just knowledge. It's knowledge, and how we interpret it and what we do with it are all things that I think fit into free will and how we use it. And what scares me are people that try to tell me, because of their view of any topic, no matter what it is, whether it's human rights or diseases or whatever, that they're going to tell me what science is so that I have to follow it, because that's my free will. That's my free will to say, no, I disagree with that. And I think that's really what you're talking about.
It is. It's well said there, Mike. However, we need to be careful of relativizing it as well, of saying everything is whatever you want it to be, and everything's based on interpretation. Not everything is. And at the same time, going to the other extreme, saying there's an absolute view here, and if you don't agree with it, you must be guilty, and we have to ban you from any kind of posting on any kind of social media, or allow you not to even speak. That's one extreme. There are two extremes to avoid. And
well, that's very true. But you take the example of a law that Stephen Hawking says it took years to prove the law, and yet what did they prove? They couldn't disprove it. That's usually the case of all the laws, right? Or things we can't disprove. Okay, you start looking at what they're using for COVID data, and right off the bat, I say, where was your measurement systems analysis? You know, there are hospitals reporting deaths and things that I know for a fact, because I have relatives in hospital, that they reported heart attacks as COVID to get the money. And so you get into all sorts of warped things that come in with that knowledge gain to begin with. And then, you know, it's going to take years to follow any science, no matter what it is, if you look at the history of science, because we don't have, you know, that many laws, I got that out there, as compared to all the relative facts that are out there. I don't know, maybe that's just me. It all comes down to, though, the simple challenge that I like to ask people that are atheists is which came first, the chicken or the egg? To me, it's the classic example of something had to create that dang chicken first. You know, it's like, I have never heard a scientist tell me a great theory of which one came first. It was like, you know, you can say it was evolution, huh? You know, I don't see that. I just don't see it. And anyways, good topic.
Yeah, Mike, just to add on to what you were saying, by the way, it's good to see you.
Thank you, sir. You too.
To add on to what you were saying, the chicken and the egg, you can replace those words with mind and matter.
Yes.
Right. So which came first, mind or matter? And
right.
You know, that's the beauty of what of science now is. I think we're living in a privileged time where advances in technology and advances in science are pointing us to God, and that's, you know, that's pretty cool.
Well, Mike, doesn't it really come down to whether you accept the premise or whether you reject everything that you are exposed to? I'd just like to go back to Khaldoun's initial presentation when he said he came into the class or whatever that on mythology, and the instructor was barefoot. That reminds me of, supposedly you weren't taught by Einstein, were you? Because at Princeton, he used to go to his class also barefoot.
Interesting.
But I have another question somewhat related, or that in a different context. We're studying a book written by Thaddeus Williams. I don't know if you're familiar with that book. It's called Reflect. Becoming yourself by mirroring the greatest person in history. Now, I thought we were exposed to the fact that we should follow Jesus, not become Jesus. There's only one person that can be Christ.
Right.
So I don't understand why he chose. I always attack these topics or whatever that, you know, why the thing. Sure, mirror, kind of reflect of sorts, but you have to place a limit on that reflection, not 100%.
Well, did not Jesus, though, try to tell people that they could be as good as him if they wanted? That's, again, gets into the free will thing. You know, not many of us are strong enough to follow in the path of Jesus. And Jesus, I think, was sent to be our example of the good, to teach us to, you know, because if you read the Old Testament, it's mostly seems like history to me, and it tells you about the wars and the battles and how God saved the chosen people and things like that. And it seems like Jesus came along and said, and here's what you need to do. And it all comes down to love. I heard that mentioned earlier. Where does the love come from?
Yeah.
You know, and I've had atheists try to teach me they think it's just a commonality of man. I go, no, if you follow the science, man is an animal and animals are survival of the fittest. They don't have those kind of compassions theoretically.
Not to defend Dawkins or that or whatever that, but I think what we see in the Old Testament is one type of God. And in the New Testament, we see a totally different person who, you know, presents his son that is our example, whatever that. It's almost like, you know, the two sides
It
of a
does sound
coin.
like that. That was an argument way back during the beginning of Christendom, where people argued about the Old and New Testament being two different gods. But if you were to take a look at the works and the words of Jesus in the book of Revelation, he is actually more harsh, more judgmental on sin than the God of the Old Testament ever was. Jesus himself is actually harsh on sin, and he brings down fire and brimstone much more so than God did on Sodom and Gomorrah on the earth. But anyway, the point is that the God of love and the God of judgment are the same God. But the point you brought up earlier, is it Thor?
Yeah, Thor, right. Yeah.
Regarding reflecting, I haven't read that book, but it just reminds me of something that's helpful for me. It's an actual story written by Nathaniel Hawthorne in 1850 called The Great Stone Face. It's a short story. He has many of those. Nathaniel Hawthorne, he's the one who's famous for The Scarlet Letter and a bunch of other books. Anyway, The Great Stone Face is about a young man who always looks up to this great face in the mountain with all the villagers constantly looking at this face as a Messiah figure who's going to come and redeem everyone. He never shows up. Throughout his whole life, the young boy is always looking at the face and emulating who that person is in his character. Finally, when the young boy becomes an older man, the villagers turn to the boy and they look at his face. And lo and behold, he becomes just like an image of him. We become what we constantly look at. We become like that which we focus on long enough. I mean, as a comical thing, you say people look like their pets after a while, or the other way around. But the point is, when we focus on that person and we start becoming him, and we are called Christians, which is what? Little Christ.
I think that strengthens your argument about fatherless sons or that just tend to be more atheists than others that have a core.
Right. Yeah. Let's go back to that.
Well, fatherless children are
along that line. This is just a curiosity.
absent.
Does that?
I'm sorry. I was just saying that the fatherless kids are just absent of teaching, and in that light they become lost probably. I mean, someone has to teach a child about God. I really believe that. I don't think it's just natural to go out in society and learn that.
No.
One, I just want to make a comment first before I ask my question, is that in the Old Testament, this is what I'm gradually, and I'm late to it in life, learning that the whole Old Testament is preparing for Jesus. I mean, you can go back and read the Old Testament with Jesus in mind. And when you do that, you see all the foreshadowing, you see Jesus present. It paves the way for him to come. The whole Old Testament is preparing the Jewish people and us as we read it for him to come. So it's completely tied together. It's not like a separate thing. As you said, that they're all one, and then the Holy Spirit, too. But my question was just a curiosity question about the study when you said about absentee fathers or fathers that shove the gospel down their kids' throats, but weren't there to actually parent them. How have you found anything similar for women, atheists, women who don't believe or become agnostics, or those who do believe?
Fascinating question, something I have to look into, but no, I haven't seen a connection there with that. No.
Okay.
The father figure represents an authority figure in life and in culture, and it's actually every culture, all the world. When the father figure breaks down, that's a problem. The mother figure is generally seen as a patriarch, the nurturer, and the one who provides a sense of meaning and hope within the child to uplift them, especially when they're down. But the father figure represents authority and structure. And the God figure represents that from a patriarchal level, where the earth represents the one who receives and the father the one who gives. So it's a father. When that breaks down, you end up having that structural problem there psychologically. I haven't seen anything regarding the female atheists out there, but I think there's a strong connection to the father back to that one as well. If you're referring to the mothers who actually deny the faith, does that have effect on the children? That would be an interesting study to publish and look into.
Well, it has been my experience in families that have either lost the father, or in some cases they're both still there, but the mother is the one leading the family to God. You know, the father may even need that leadership depending on what he came from. And she saw value in him to marry him, but still had a lot to do to help try to bring him to Jesus the way, you know, she felt. And so I think, you know, again, it goes back to, it's a learned person in the family who's driving it so much as it is a male or a female. And I do like the idea that we're supposed to be fathers. We're supposed to be what God has said in the Bible of the leaders of the family, but that's really been changing a lot. And, you know, especially when women and men started working as teams. My mother once reflected, you know, she never worked. And she says, you know, son, she says, I see these days it's so hard to make it that both of you have to work like a team of horses to make it. And so you really realize, and then if you start looking at marriage, God says, whatever he put together, let no one put asunder. You become one. And so I think there's a rock there that's formed when you have them both, as opposed to just one or the other trying to make up for the loss of the, you know, the other. There's just a lot to that.
Well said.
Interesting.
Khaldoun, if I can ask you a question. So you run into the lion's den, or you run to the lion and so forth. And I guess my question is, I think I know your answer, but you might surprise me. So when you go to that person, I mean, do you have a goal in mind? I mean, what would you consider to be a successful talk with that person, or a successful debate with that person? I mean, ultimately to convert them from their atheism to a believer, but that's not realistic in that situation. So what are your goal in that situation? How would you handle it?
Sure. What is your name?
Bob.
Hello, Bob. Hello. I'm not sure if you're asking me what is my evangelistic strategy, or are you asking me what's my goal when I meet people who are atheistic? How do I use apologetics? What is my apologetic method? Can you expand a little bit on the question so I'll make sure I answer the right one?
Well, I didn't have anything specifically. I guess, you know, everything's different. The conversation or the questions you would ask that person will lead you to how you're going to defend your belief, or ask questions of that person to have them defend their beliefs and what they believe and so forth. So I guess, you know, when you have a discussion like that, it's a couple of minutes, it's 5 minutes, maybe if it's really a long conversation, it might be a half hour, an hour or longer. But I mean, what is your ultimate goal when you have that first confrontation with someone who is a complete atheist, you know, dyed-in-the-wool atheist? I mean, what would walk away and be success for you, and how would you?
Let me answer you with a story. So I taught some classes at Oxford University in philosophy of religion. There was a lady who took the class. She was in her late 70s. She actually knew more about the theologians and philosophers and the sociologists and neuroscientists than most of the people in the class put together. I would cite something. She'd say, actually, Professor, that's wrong. Part 2, Section 7 says ABC. Whoa, all right. And then she would cite Augustine for me, and they'd correct me there as well. And she was a very strong skeptic atheist. But we had a dialogue in the class, constantly back and forth. And we kept that relationship after class. Class was over. And we kept continuing. She would be asking me questions and I would respond to the best of my ability. After a couple of years of this, she asked me, Khaldoun, are you trying to convert me? I said, no, Pauline, I'm trying to love you.
Like
In
that
that
answer.
case, continue. I said, okay. So we continued. I went to her baptism 2 years ago. She became a believer at 78. Baptized. And she said, I cannot deny the man from Nazareth. Christendom has its problems. Theology makes my head roll, but I cannot deny the reality and the goodness and the majesty of Jesus. And my strategy with her is not necessarily to answer every question. I couldn't. She just had some very good ones, and I'm still struggling with some myself. And with people in general, the vast majority of people, which includes us, by the way, the information we have is from other people. Very few of us actually think about and question the presuppositions and belief systems we hold on to. Usually we just take those for granted. That includes atheists or believers. So the questions that people ask is what I was doing here. Gets people to dive deep into what they believe and why they believe it. But all that secondary to know that they love you, that you love them, that you actually care about them as a person, makes me keep the conversation.
That's good. Good.
Yeah.
That's how I do that.
Thanks.
Yeah. Thanks, Bob.
I have a question for you, sir. How would you respond to the argument, I don't believe in God. I can't disprove God because there's no way to disprove a negative. Have you heard that, and how would you respond?
Hello, Brad. Thank you for joining us.
Yeah, you're welcome.
The argument you present is a common one that you cannot prove an absolute negative, which is actually false. You can. For example, I can prove that there are no, the Ayatollah Khomeini is not on this call that we can see. It's just showing himself on a video right now with us. Or as Bill Craig would say, I could prove that there are no T-Rexes walking around in downtown Chicago right now.
Okay.
Those are absolute statements. I just made an absolute negative. You can.
Okay, but I want to push back a little bit on that. I listened to the example you cite from Bill Craig is the one I was thinking of. And he says, you can prove there are no Muslims in the United States Senate.
Yes, that was one.
And you can prove that there are no living T-Rexes on the earth. And I always thought about that, and I said, yes, the one about the Senate is true, because you can exhaustively search the United States Senate, but you cannot exhaustively search, well, maybe you could the earth.
Or downtown Chicago.
But you could never could you prove there are no unicorns in the universe? So I think that's a little bit hitting more, proving there's no God. So I'm not sure how to respond to that.
How does that prove there are the unicorns issue? Or how does that prove there is no God? That doesn't prove that.
Right. It doesn't prove it, but they'll just say, I need evidence. And of course there is evidence. That's where you present the evidence.
Right, but what makes Christendom a little bit different than the general theistic concepts of God as an esoteric ideological figure in the pie in the sky is the incarnation of Jesus of Nazareth on earth in Jerusalem, living in the historical reality, evidenced by multiple scholars in history. Also, the evidence of miracles in people's lives even today shows you there's a little bit more to the concept of God than just a figure in the sky that brings us hope like an archetype. Miracles show evidence of that. So does the changed lives of people. And the Church of Jesus Christ, which I said to you earlier, has done more humanitarian good than all the organizations combined on the planet. I don't think those are things you can easily dismiss. I completely avoided the cosmological, teleological, ontological arguments. Those are very interesting, very heavy. But on a reality, practical level, those are realities that are there.
Right, but I'm still not sure how you can. I guess my point would be, you kind of have to concede the point that you can't prove a universal negative at that point, but you do point to evidence.
Well, I just presented, you just presented some yourself. There's no Muslims in the United States Senate. President Donald Trump is no longer President Donald Trump. That's universal. He's not. I just said a negative.
Right. You can prove a negative in cases where the field of inquiry is limited. So the United States Senate is finite, and it's easy. You can search it exhaustively. But I feel like you kind of have to concede that you can't exhaustively search the universe.
Of course, yeah.
There
are things you cannot know for sure if there are no life on, or a biological organic life somewhere on the planet, 200 billion light years from here. You can't know that for sure and make a categorical statement about it. You can't. No, you can't.
Okay.
Yeah, there's a level of trust there that comes in. Brad.
Brad, bring me back to the original question. It was in the context of, can you prove there is no God? Is that really the basis of the question?
Things I've seen are where people say, of course I can't prove there's no God because you can't prove a universal negative.
I mean, I suspect that, and Khaldoun, stop me if I say something wrong here, but I don't know that we can build an absolute proof for or against God, but you've got to look at the preponderance of the evidence, and where does the preponderance of the evidence lead us to? And it's, at least in my mind, it's pretty overwhelming in terms of in favor of the existence of God. I just look around. To prove there is no God, I think would be really difficult, and maybe impossible.
Well, you're asking sort of the opposites of two things there. I mean, there's two questions involved. One would be prove that God does exist, and then you're looking at prove God doesn't. And it's always where the atheist, I think, is always attacking the people that have the most proof that he does, when they don't have any that he doesn't.
Well,
does that make sense?
And what happens too, Mike, is and Khaldoun mentioned this at the beginning of his talk, is that the I'll say the smart atheist recognizes that there is, and I think this is true, there is a mountain of evidence, and you can just go down the list of all of the cosmological, teleological, moral argument, ontological, and just go down the list. And so the atheist, instead of defining their atheism and they believe that there is no God, that they have changed that slightly to say they lack a belief. And so the idea being to put all of the burden of proof on the theist, proving the existence of God. But it still, I don't think, changes the fact that the preponderance of evidence, still points to evidence for God.
Mm-hmm. Well, Mike, do you remember the study you sent me like 10 files of, and because they were so big, you couldn't get them all in one email? There were like 10 chapters, I call it, of the study. And what was your bottom line that you were trying to prove which one was the right theory, God existed or didn't exist? And your summary, as I recall, was something like your evidence showed that the study proved to the 10 to the minus 1200s or something like that, that God was more likely to exist than not.
Got a good memory, Mike. I mean, that goes back quite a few years ago. Maybe.
Sir, I have used that.
Good.
So many times.
Good.
Just this summer. I've offered people, because I still have those files. And I said, you want to read all the files? I'll send them to you.
That is awesome to hear, Mike.
Professional scientists that did this study.
Yep. That was a series of emails. There was like 10 emails, and
It'll be interesting for you to share that with all of us there, Mike.
I could do that, Khaldoun. I kind of just went down the key arguments for the existence of God and made an email out of each argument.
It'll be interesting to see that, right? Hey guys, you can see this on my screen there in Faith.
Yeah, right.
This is from Blaise Pascal. He said, in faith, there's enough light for those who want to believe and enough shadows to blind those who don't. Jesus himself said the statement, I thank you, Father, for revealing these things from the, hiding these things from the learned and the wise and revealing them to the innocent and simple. God is a profound way of dealing with things. He doesn't force, he's a gentleman, he doesn't force himself upon people until a certain time comes where the evidence is overwhelming. But the time comes where he allows us to want to believe or not, and that is just the way God set the system up. I think no matter what evidence I present somebody, if they don't want to believe, they won't.
Well, but it's such a personal thing. I remember back when I was 12 years old, I was in the church with my parents, and I sat up in the loft because that's where the boys usually wrestled around and played rather than watch church. And it's kind of like Reverend Lindsay, who was our preacher in the First Baptist Church in Florida, there at Jacksonville, Florida. This was a man that I only came when my dad was overseas and my mom had stayed with her mom. So he only saw us like once every 3 or 4 years when she had to go back home while he was getting residence for us and stuff like that. But it's kind of like out of the blue, he goes, Mike, you boys be quiet up there. And he knew my name. I mean, I understood the church had 40,000 members. But he always remembered when I came back. But it's like there was just accumulation of things from wrestling with the boys to listening to the stories of this wonderful God, that suddenly a voice actually felt like it came within me that said, you want this. You go down there and profess your sins, young man, and do it. And my mom tells this story. I'm repeating her words because she said, there went Mike. She said, at the end of the sermons, she said, they go. And I remember I talked to people, I professed, but I went into all sorts of studies then for a while. I even thought I wanted to be a minister. But it's like along the way, that never broke down. And the thing that I worry about is that how does that voice get into everyone? You can't do it just by testimony. I've testified many, many times to the beautiful life I've had. I've had people that, there was 700 Club one time I was listening to it, and they said, God wants you to be a good example so people are drawn to live like you. And so I've tried to do that. When people see my wife and I, they say, we want to be like you. And when they do, I say, well, let me help you. I can help you be like me. I can coach you on the little things that we do that keep the love and keep the interest. But it's kind of like all of those are things you can build in towards this. God is the answer. God came into my life. God still speaks to me. It's like those little voices that say, that's not right. Don't go down there. That's God whispering in your ear. God says you watch out for things. I've watched out. I've only distrusted that little, and I didn't so much distrust. I just thought maybe I didn't hear it. But it's like it cost me the life of my cat. Someone was petting my cat outside of a temporary place we were staying in, and I thought knew him and knew he was mine. But anyways, God said, roll your window down and said, tell her it's your cat. And she looked up and smiled, and I waved back, and that was it. My urgency to get to work was gone. When I came back, she'd taken my cat to the pound. It happened to be a pound that didn't keep cats very long. They exterminated him immediately, and we went down there. She had been promised that they would keep him and find a home for him. And we went down there, and the whole story turned out to be a tragedy. But I told my wife, I said, I will never ignore those little voices again. And this was jumping from being a 12-year-old to being a married man with a child of my own. And it's kind of like, I look at those things and say, when I want to teach someone who's a non-believer, it's like when I taught in business. If people didn't want to learn, they weren't going to. So really, it has to start with something that attracts them to you, something that says, I want to be like you. I could tell you stories of prayer and bring the results they've brought. I could tell you things where my wife was critically ill and just singing Jesus loves me helped reduce her pain. It just, there's so many miracles that to me that I feel I've experienced, but even that, I saw them. I felt them. They were mine. So I'm not sure, other than sometimes the passion of it can create that interest. But that's the question I like to say is, what can we do to get someone to get to learn that they can get Jesus into their heart too? Sorry I took so long.
Early on when you began your discussions this evening, you talked about thinking about your family and love. In my life, as far as I'm concerned, there's really only two emotions, love and fear, and one is the absence of the other. And either you believe or you don't believe. Lord, I believe, help my unbelief, And I sit here and watch this discussion, and I think back of my upbringing out in a little town out in Iowa. Here we have a discussion amongst learned, quote, learned people. How do you explain this kind of discussion to someone who's not, only you can give a sermon, but it has to be just your life. You don't have to use words. You just have to. I've enjoyed. Another thing, Stephen Hawking, in one of his books that I read, they asked him a question and he said, if I could answer that question, I'd know the mind of God.
Mm.
And he claimed he was an atheist, but I remember reading that, and I think maybe it may have been in that same book that you had on there. But if you go back to it, he had a loss for words, and he said, if I know that answer, I would know the mind of God. So it proved that he really wasn't an atheist, I would think. So thank you for your discussion tonight. Very enjoyable.
Thank you.
Yeah, just to add on to Mike and Lee. Lee, good to see you too. To add on to what you guys are saying, I mean, I think the whole objective of evangelism and apologetics and witnessing to people, we can plant the seeds, and we can help to remove the intellectual barriers or whatever, perhaps emotional barriers. But I think the Holy Spirit closes the deal.
Yeah.
And our job is to just what you guys were just saying.
Here's the rationale I use of that, having read the tome by Thomas, I'm okay, you're okay. You're dealing with another person and you're trying to convince them that they're not okay, and they don't accept that premise, then there is no problem. So that's your roadblock on whatever topic you're trying to get across.
Yeah. Well, it's hard to face a person who's lost everything and you're telling them turn to God, that God will take care of you, because that's been my thought for myself. I mean, at one time when my wife was so sick, I prayed and I told the Lord, I said, Lord, I said, you've given me everything I have, but I said, I'm going to leave the house unlocked today on my way to her in the hospital, and take it all. I mean, I won't even report it gone. Take it all, because all I care about is her. And I went, and she got better. Several miracles were involved in it, I'm sure. And it's because, I think that the Lord knew I didn't care about that stuff. I do only care about the love. You said it well. I have no fear ever. I went to Vietnam, orders to go, and through the whole thing, saying God will take care of me, and that could be that he'll take me home. I don't care either one, because I feel like God is with me.
Yes. Well, I don't want to be on the time here, so we've already been over an hour and a half. Mike Parks.
Good.
Just taking the coat off here. We get to go all night.
Really good discussion, and I appreciate the discussion that we've had this evening. Before we close, does anyone else have anything else? Okay, Khaldoun, thank you again for joining us. Yeah, exactly. we are all very appreciative. Next month we've got our guest speaker is Daniel Ray. He's the host of the podcast Good Heavens, and he is the co-editor of the book the Story of the Cosmos: How the Heavens Declare the Glory of God. If you guys remember, we had a speaker, Sarah Salviander, back, I don't know, 2 or 3 months ago, an astrophysicist. She wrote one of the chapters in the book. So Daniel was one of the co-editors of this book. So middle of next month, I'll get information out as we get closer to that.
Thank you, Mike. And by the way, if you guys, I've done a extensive work also on the problem of evil. It's one of the reasons I actually started my ministry, Logically Faithful. I lost my son a number of years ago. And one of the reasons I continue to believe in God is not because God works for me. He didn't work for me. He didn't deliver what I wanted. I believe in him because it's true. And I believe fundamentally that he's real and that I will walk on streets of gold one day with my little boy.
Amen.
Not
Amen.
because I want it to be true, because I fundamentally believe it to be the case ontologically. And I've written something I may hopefully will help you guys. It's on my webpage, Logically Faithful. It's an infographic called 7 Ways to Deal with Evil. It's free. You just go to the Logically Faithful page and you can get that there.
Bill wants to know that.
Infographic.
Yeah,
Well, maybe
and
just
go
to the
ahead, Mike.
loss of your son, I say I prayed the same thing for her to be well. And in my case, it was answered. But it's kind of like I also told the Lord I was prepared because I would never deny him taking her home. And it's something that if he needed her and wanted her, and I say the same thing, God may take our loved ones, but it's because of something that we actually need. They needed maybe more than we do. And I don't think it's because you didn't get what you wanted. So I hope that helps. I don't mean to hurt.
Say that last part again about what I wanted. I get it clear.
Well, you said obviously you wanted your son to live and to stay on. And I'm saying I made the rationale that said God doesn't always give you what you want. God gives you what you need and what's needed for the situation. And that situation, who knows what kinds of horrors and pains he could have prevented from your son from growing up to have because he knew it was time to take him then. And to me, that's the essence of trying to be faithful, even when you don't get exactly what you want. Because very few times in my prayers have I gotten what I wanted, but amazingly, it turned out it was what I needed. So.
Thank you, Michael.
Okay, guys. Thank you all. Good,
Thank you.
good discussion.
Thank you.
We'll do this again next month. Thanks again, Khaldoun.
Thank you,
Thanks for
Calvin.
organizing it, Mike.
My privilege. You guys
Bye-bye.
have a good evening. Bye-bye.
You too,
Thank
sir.
you.
Bye-bye.